Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Therapy Wise. Today, I have a very special guest on the podcast, Ken Fierheller. And Ken is a good friend of mine. We meet once a month. Welcome, Ken.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me today. I'm super excited to be here, Jenny.
Yes, we got chatting before recording, and we realized, okay, we have to stop just chit chatting with each other like we always do and start recording. So we'll just start talking as we were before. So,
Yeah,
what I wanted to do is just tell the listeners a little bit about how we met, and then we'll get into kind of who you are and what you do in this world.
okay. Yeah, great place to start.
So, I just think it was kind of funny how we met because we were both a part of this. It was a Facebook group, kind of a business group in the States. And it was about, running psychology practices, group practices. And Ken reached out to me kind of privately and just said, "Hey, I can see you're from Canada. I'm also from Canada. And just wondering if you wanted to join a mastermind group." And, I was thinking about starting one. And I was like, yeah, totally. Let's do that because there are a lot of dynamics that go into running a group here in Canada that are so different from the States. And so over the years, we've met once a month now for, I don't even know, like, do you know how long we've been meeting?
COVID has scrambled my brain so much with time. Like it feels like 2 years. It's probably been 4 years.
Yeah, I think it probably has been. It's definitely pre-COVID. So yeah, and we had some other people in the group here and there, and everybody's priorities, shift and change. And so now you and I think we're afraid to welcome in other people to our little group because we just have so much fun chatting about, and often, I don't even own a group practice anymore, and we're still meeting. So we have a great time. So I just love how we met. And I just think it's a testament to, you're a very growth oriented person, as am I. And, we prioritize kind of similar things, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, like yeah, we're both committed to going down the rabbit hole as far as we can with our own personal growth and what we're learning. And uh, I think that's probably why we don't want to invite other people into the group anymore, right? It's like I don't want to pop up to that cliche part of like getting to know someone again. It's like let's dive in deep. Like we were talking for 5-10 minutes right before we hit record. We're like, we just got to hit record because we just keep on diving into topics, even today, that are unintentionally about the subject
Yeah.
of today's conversation. Like, okay, we just dive deep together, so it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and the kind of business that you have so they have a little basis for understanding where you're at, and then we'll hop into our the topic we're going to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So I met Jenny because I run a group psychology practice. So we currently we have uh, I think there's 8 of us on the team who are all psychologists, psychotherapists, and then one life coach. And so we operate in Calgary, Alberta. And I'm the owner of the company. I'm a practicing registered psychotherapist and coach. So I guess who I serve is more like I work in the domain of everything relationship, but so couples therapy, affair recovery. I love working with folks around codependency. I, I work with a lot of people in the dating world, helping them to attract a partner. And for whatever reason, I've also attracted a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners into my practice. So it's kind of become an area where I get really super excited working with business owners in town.
Mhm.
Um, and what else can I tell you? I live out in Canmore. My husband, a father, nature baby. Love like I moved out here from Toronto in 2011, so love where I live. Love living in a small little mountain town, and yeah, I think that's probably it for now for the
Yeah,
introduction.
that's a good high level summary. And I know you're so much even more than that and deeper than that. So let's talk about your spirituality and some of your experiences and opening up to spiritual growth, because that's something that you and we didn't realize we connected on that level at first. And then as we began talking more about that, and especially I talk about that all the time because that's kind of the
Mhm.
direction that I went in for my work, I realized, oh my gosh, you've had this such an interesting path in this area. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that day too. I remember that day when we had that conversation and was like, hey, do you have these same beliefs around spirituality? And then that was a day where we just sort of dropped into some really, really great conversations. I think they've really shifted and transformed into something else afterwards. Um, yeah, so I guess like where do I begin with that? I think like my spirituality really began out of pain. So there was a period. I know I've done a lot of work around this stuff, but there was a period in time, probably between like grade 8 to grade 11. There was a chunk of time in there where life was really hard. I got bullied a lot, uh, beat up. There was just a lot of pain. There was a lot of depression that came at that time period, and so I really struggled with my identity, who I was back then. Like it was really like, I don't like who I am. Why am I not likable? Why am I having this struggle? And things eventually switched for me, but there were some undercurrents still there. But during that time, I think like I think when you go through painful periods in your time, it's really an opportunity to reflect. And so for me, I started to ask bigger questions during that time period. And so I started to open up and I started to read books. One of the books I read way back when was called The Peaceful Warrior by Dan, what was it, Dan McMillan or Dan Mellon? I
It's
forget.
Miller. If
Miller, is it?
I think so.
Yeah. I, it resonated with me. I loved it. And then I read the Celestian Prophecy, and these are really great sort of introductory books of just dabbling and getting you used to the ideas of just opening up and thinking about that there's something more, that we're all connected. And so that was the beginning. And I remember being 24 and I took off on a backpacking adventure to Thailand. And I think I went on that trip a little bit different than most people. Like I think a lot of people, when they were backpacking at that age in that time period, because I had a lot of friends who did the same thing. They were going and it was like an adventure. They're going to immerse themselves in the culture and just explore. I have this strong intention that I wanted to radically change who I was. I was going on this trip, but it was really like this exterior trip that I was going on, but I wanted to change my interior landscape. And about 2 months before I went, I was supposed to go with my best friend at the time. And what I noticed was he wasn't talking about this trip at all. And so my spidey senses were up and I'm like, you're not going on this trip, are you? And he was like, no, I'm not. I just didn't know how to tell you. And so that was like a pivotal moment for me where I had fear come up of like, oh, I got to do this trip on my own. That's scary. And then this excitement of this is just the way it needs to be. And so, but the fear sort of dominated the beginning because before I left, I was on, and this is back in like 2003, like right before 2004. I'm on the internet, and I can't even remember what the internet was like back then, but like I'm on this travel forum, and I meet this guy from New Brunswick, same age, backpacking Thailand. He's going a couple weeks before me, so we meet downtown Toronto, and we have a coffee, and we're like, hey, should like we meet up and travel together? So this is me sort of throwing this safety net out of like, I'm scared, I don't want to do this alone.
Yeah.
And we traveled together for a few weeks, and I brought journals with me. So it's funny looking back in time, and I still have these journals, so I can go back and look like, what was I thinking way back when? I was writing in my journal about 3 weeks after arriving, and I was traveling with him, and we were on these islands and partying, and he was all about wanting to meet girls, and so we're going to these full moon parties on these beaches. It was fun, but none of those intentions were happening. Like I'm like, I had this realization. I'm like, I'm not doing anything different that I could be doing back home right now.
Mhm.
And this is not what I wanted to do. So I remember I was writing about that, and then had this breakup conversation with the guy from New Brunswick, and said, okay, I think it's time to move on. And it was staying in this remote place on Koh Tao, small little snorkeling diving island in Thailand. And there was a couple that was staying at the same lodge that was talking about this meditation retreat they just did. And I have never had any experience with meditation. And it was a 10-day silent meditation retreat in the
Oh my
jungle.
gosh, that's, very hard for a beginner.
So this is how I began. So I just, it was the beginning stages of I'm just going to open up. I'm going to listen. I'm going to go and do this 10-day meditation retreat. And it was hard. It was so hard. I don't, have you ever done one?
No, I haven't, but I have heard, and I can just imagine how difficult, you don't realize how much of an urge there is to be
Mm.
verbal and communicate until that's taken off the table.
It's like, there were so many times where I wanted to give up, but you're with I think there was like 60, 80 other people with me. You don't know them because you can't talk, but you look around and you have this thing that happens where, like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. And like, there was a few people that popped up and tapped out, but most of us stayed through the whole time. And it was so interesting because on the 11th day, we all hung out and could talk for the first time. And we had like 10 days of nodding at one another and smiling, like doing different chores around the property or meditating, and then everyone was just processing and talking about their experience. And everyone's experience was so similar. Like, everyone wanted to give up. Everyone was like, okay, if you could do it, I can do it. Um, and you had this, like, how I would define it was an encounter with yourself. Like, the longer I just stayed with myself, the more, like, I was having these memories that would just pop up, and I'm like, wow, I haven't had access to these memories in years. And so there's that part, and then the other part was like, wow, I'm crazy. Like, the thoughts that are popping into my head, wow, this is so crazy. Which the head monk, like, who was teaching us, he's like, he called it the monkey mind, and he's like, our monkey mind's so crazy. And so that was like that was sort of my, like, initiation into meditation. And my whole experience, my whole trip just bloomed after that. Like, my intuition was just so high afterwards, and I just met all kinds of amazing people, and it felt like I was on a spiritual journey at that point.
Oh, you totally
And
were. That was kind of like, Navy SEALs boot camp for spirituality, really. And, it doesn't seem, I find meditation is such an example of it doesn't appear very hard, right? It's like, okay, you just, or even not talking. It's like, oh, yeah, I could do that. And then when you go to do it for that long, it's incredibly challenging. And, I think you're really speaking to something that we don't do a lot of now, which is, just sitting with ourselves, especially, since that time, iPhones have become, more a part of the zeitgeist. And so we don't realize how rare it is to just, have a day of just being with ourselves and not being distracted by the world around us, through our phones or TV or the internet.
yeah, and I notice in myself, I long for it now. Like, I long for that, like, just getting quiet and silent, and not and just not having all those demands, and being popping onto technology and answering to people, and as a business owner, there's always things coming down the pipeline. That's just the name of the game, right? So
You're motivating me. I've been really thinking about doing a phone detox.
mhm.
And even just an input detox where, I tend to do a lot of learning and, listening to teachers, and just to have a break from all social media, all learning for a month. I just really feel like that is the key to my next level of growth. So I feel like this conversation was perfect timing.
Love it, love it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So your spiritual kind of trip that you sort of, this It's
Mm,
almost like a
mhm.
coming of age journey, it feels like to me. It blossomed after that, and so then what happened?
Well, so yeah, it was interesting because I met a girl on that trip who I was in a relationship with for a year, and so it was, and she was very, very spiritual. So it was this like, hyper focused, always talking and practicing meditation, and we she was from St. Louis, so so we got back from our trip. We went to India and Nepal, um, and the plan was always to go back. And we eventually broke up, and I was in this I was in this place of like, I want to go back and I want to pursue this enlightenment journey that I was on. And I like that, like I was crazy back then. I wanted to go live in caves with monks, and I wanted to, and not that you're crazy if you're doing that, but like that's just not me. Like,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, I think
I,
probably that was your vision of, okay, if you live a spiritual life, you can't do
mm,
that, in downtown Toronto. I have to, go live in this remote area and dedicate my life to it.
absolutely. And but I was set on going back on this journey, and so I had this intention. So I had a plane ticket to Bangalore, India, and I had this intention. I just want to find the highest teachings possible, but I had no plan at all. Like I literally got off the plane. It's 12:30 in the evening. It's chaos in that airport, and I ended up finding my way to this Tibetan monastery, and it was such an incredible journey. Like I was there for, it was the first time they did English translation, and so it was a month-long meditation retreat. And this was more intensive than the 10-day meditation retreat that I was on in Thailand, because this was 14-hour days just doing mantras and sitting in the monastery and just diving in deep. And so that was my real big deep dive. And I had this huge revelation on that trip of like, home is where the heart is. Like I had that experience of like, okay, wherever I am, this, like, I just feel really deeply centered afterwards. And shortly after that, I found myself training to be a Gestalt psychotherapist in Toronto. And I so my spiritual, this was an interesting thing with my spiritual journey. When I trained to be a therapist, it went to the back burn.
Oh.
It was like this piece of like, okay, I can't bring that part of me into this. I have to be clinical, and I have to be focused, and I'm helping people with their mental health. And so it was really something that I put to the back burner for a while. Um,
You and I have that in common then, well, I think I kept doing it, but it was always kind of in the background, not outward, because I
mm,
thought, well, that's not what a psychologist is, so I can't do that.
yeah, we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not allowed.
I found it hard to I jumped into this psychology world, and I found it hard at first to have them both integrated. And it was, I don't know, like I started to, like, where I felt like I was really drawn back to it was when I went through a separation with my ex
Mm,
uh in 2015, 14, that time period. Like it was a hard period of time, and it was this, like, it was like, oh, old Ken's coming back, like I'm going in deep, like that's where I want to go. And and that's a time period where, have you heard of Wim Hof?
yeah, I just read his book actually on my,
Yeah,
recent vacation. I thought, you know what? I've always meant to read that book, so I read it on the plane.
I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
what do you think?
I loved it. Like I found the book in general was so interesting to me because he really lived so off grid and
Mhm,
just did things, purely out of his own innate wisdom.
mhm.
And, he wasn't influenced by other people. He's such a rebel. And he
Yeah.
did things that, other people would be afraid of because, they could be dangerous or, caused so many problems, but he just went for it. And it's just been such an incredible outcome. Like now there's so much research on his methodologies and it's all proving to be incredibly, science-based, but he didn't know that at the time. It was really a spiritual thing.
It's very spiritual thing. Like so finding his method has been super helpful, because like doing the deep breathing, you naturally go inward and you go
Yeah.
through these layers.
I love
And
his
it's
breathing methodology. I found, in reading the book, how often I hold my breath and just like
Mhm.
hold in everything. And so I've really been consciously choosing to breathe more consciously, breathe more deeply, use his methodologies. And I feel so much more energized and present and centered as a result.
I love what he's brought to the world. It's so it's so interesting, because I started in 2014 really doing his exercises.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many of my clients now, like they'll tell me, as part of, like, when I'm asking them, so what do you do when you're in these stressful periods? So many people do Wim Hof now,
Wow.
and
You
I
know,
love it.
I think it's such, the topic that we wanted to discuss today. We wanted to talk about spirituality and also masculinity. And I think that Wim Hof is such a good meld of those two. He's a very masculine, he's very in his masculine as a man, and also a very spiritual person, and such a good example of an elevated form of masculinity, conscious masculinity, not toxic in any way.
I couldn't agree more. I there's such a shortage, and this is my disclaimer, my belief, but there's such a shortage around role models.
Hmm.
Like when I think about it, then I like of like who would I say is a good role model? So I didn't even think of Wim, but yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, some of the role models, I think we almost are, we can become a little bit too judgmental of people in the media as well. So, there are people that they have some wonderful teachings and qualities and traits. And then they also have kind of this other side that might be, closed minded, or, certain qualities. It's like, well, I don't agree with that. And I feel that we've kind of lost the art of, accepting certain parts of someone and not accepting, not necessarily agreeing with the other side, and still seeing the benefit of some of the things that they offer. One of the people who's coming to mind is Aubrey Marcus or Jordan Peterson. He's a very controversial subject in
Yeah.
the area of, masculinity and men's work, and he said some very controversial things that I don't personally agree with. And also, I think he has some points that are important points that a lot of people are resonating with now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I was sitting in a coffee shop with some friends of mine last week, and I brought up the conversation. I'm going to talk about the subject around men and opening up more. And so I did, when I have a talk like this coming up, I like to throw it out there and just say, like, what do you think? Right. And so so my conversation with them was like, do you think we're more open now? And everyone said yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson's name came up, and I thought, okay, interesting. And so a couple of them watched Jordan and resonate with some of his points. And then they brought up, but if I say this, if I bring this up and talk about it, I'm very, very worried that I'm going to be judged.
Right. Yeah.
So so that's where I cue in and go, this is an interesting conversation, because if you guys are experiencing this, and what I'm talking about this group of friends, but a lot of my clients will say similar things as well, where they'll talk about the fear of cancel culture or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
One of the guys said, if I say something that comes across in the wrong way, it could not just impact me, it could impact my entire family. So
Mm.
I feel like in this moment, this is not me speaking, it's them. in this moment when I'm talking, I have to be very, very considerate around who's around me when I speak, because it feels like a choice between me being authentic and just saying what's on my mind, or repression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, that's not good. That's not good. We don't want to repress things. So, um,
Yeah.
but it's an interesting conversation, right? Because then, like, what's the answer here?
Yeah. I think there's a dynamic happening where we can start to be more open. And, I think there are some movements that were so important, like the feminist movement was incredibly important. Like we needed that. And a lot of things that are going on with that. In the 1960s, women couldn't even open a credit card in their own name. So we're not
Yeah.
really that far off of that time. And so the changes that have happened were so very important. And now we're just so much more aware of, speaking respectfully and being, kind in our communication style and all of that, to the point where I think we can self censor. Like I feel it too, where, it's almost like I'm afraid to speak about certain topics because I would never want to insult anyone or, say anything that's hurtful. Yet also, I think it's really doing society a disservice because we're all staying more quiet than, many of us would like to be, right? And I actually think a lot of positive change can come from people feeling more able to talk and speak and knowing that, okay, even if I don't say it perfectly, I'm willing to shift and change and acknowledge any errors. And it's not going to mean, that I'm going to be vilified for it.
Yeah, that it's it's such an interesting thing to think about, because we're really talking about, like, is it safe for me to be me and to talk about something? And maybe I don't know the answer, but I just want to be able to talk about it in an authentic way. But how can I be authentic if I'm projecting out all of these potential, like, I might say the wrong thing, so then I start to edit myself, or what if I offend some? And so then it adds extra pressure. Um, and so I don't know that that's what we want either. I don't think it is, but it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like, we are, like, another word that we chatted about, which was what's toxic about masculinity, right? So we're having a
Yeah, even
conversation.
that word, I use that word and I'm like, you know what? I don't even like that word because it has so much connotation. Now, like masculinity is unfortunately been linked with that word. And
Mhm.
in my opinion, there's so much more healthy masculinity out there than toxic. But that's really what we think about is more of it's almost like there's been a suppression of, um, the acknowledgement of some of the healthy aspects of masculinity and in men that I don't think is helping anyone.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't want to frame this. I was at a dinner party, and a friend, I was just talking about, like, some of the intention work that I do daily, and when I wake up, and I do intention work for my clients that I'm going to see that day, but also my family and friends. And so my wife and my little guy are part of that every single day. And so part of that intention work is, like, I'll write about, like, reminding myself of the energy and the way that I want to show up. And so I was sharing this with her, and she's a very, very open person. Um, and I shared that, like, I have this energy around having a protective role as well, that I like to bring to the family. And her response was, "Ooh, big man Ken. Like, the little woman needs the big man Ken around." And right away, I could feel my body just go inwards, where I'm like, "Ooh, like, I'm being judged right now."
Yeah.
And and it's a funny thing to be. I'm like, this is something really, really positive for me, and an experience that, like, that I think is really, really healthy for me. But and I know she's coming at it from an angle of, like, because we were talking about the patriarch, and we were talking about toxic masculinity. And so I'm like, okay, like, I don't see that I don't, there's a part, I don't agree with that. So then I challenged her, and I threw that out there because like that's part. I also believe a healthy aspect of positive masculinity is like one part of it is standing in the truth. And I'm like, this is what feels true to me. Like this is
Mhm.
like I actually feel like this is something that feels true to me. Like I want to, this is like, even if you judge me around it, this is something I'd like to continue to do with my little guy, which is great. And I chatted with my wife about it, and she's like, I love that about you.
I was just going to ask that if you had asked her about it, because I was going to say, I bet, a lot of women love that energy, right? And love that idea. Yet, it can be kind of frowned upon as well from the feminine aspect. Just the cultural pressure for all of us to have, a certain way of being, and maybe to not desire that protective aspect in our partners. But
Yeah.
she was able to see, yeah, I actually love that, and it's all good.
And for her, she's like, I do the same thing, Ken. Like she doesn't do the same intentional pieces I do in the morning times, but she's like, yeah, I think of myself as a protective role as well. And I don't have any sort of, there's no competition or any sort of weird, like, no, that's my role.
Mhm.
It's more of, that's great. Like, I love that we're both doing that. Like, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
And her way of doing it would probably be different than yours.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she's a great mom. So like, she's going to do it in even a way better way than I'm going to do it. But it's, yeah. Yeah.
I think you're such a good example of, you very much embody that masculine side, and you also embody that feminine side of you, which we all have both aspects. And you cultivate, very close male friendships. Just as one example of something that many men in our culture, they might connect over, going to a hockey game and having some beers or whatever. You are like going deeper, like you have deep, intimate conversations and connections with your male friends. And I think that's a bit of a rarity. Would you say that that's true?
I think, yeah, I see it. So one of the things I hear a lot in my office is a lot of men don't have a lot of close relationships in their life.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's bloody a hard thing to do as you get older,
Yeah.
to really to cultivate and have those friendships, especially if you want like nourishing, deeper conversations. Like I love, like one of the things I look for in friendship and relationship is range. Like I want to have a range. Like I want to be able to talk about absolutely everything with you.
Right.
And if I feel like I can't talk about certain subjects, then like that just feels like a limitation on the relationship of like, oh, I can't go there with you. And so I love that range. But like what, so it's interesting when so the conversation that I had with those guys in the coffee shop last week, it kept on going, kept on evolving. And I asked them, we were all fathers. And I asked them, can you imagine our fathers all talking like this? And
Yeah.
everyone right away is, no way, no way, nope, nope, nope. So all
Yeah.
across the board, no. And I leaned in and I said, I bet you they all wish they could. They just don't know how to.
Oh, 100%. And
Yeah.
and also imagine little Jacob, your son, who's, how old
Yeah.
is he now? Like 1?
He's 2 in 2 weeks.
So imagine him in, 20 years, at
Mhm.
22, what his relationships with his friends might look like. I bet it would be very different from, what you and I experience in terms of male friendships.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The only thing I worry about is technology. I'm just like, I hope that there's still an ability to connect in person and really cultivate those relationships and not have technology really interface in a way where there's a lack of depth and connection because of that. Um but we're certainly evolving. That's something that I don't think that I would have access to the, like I have quite a few male friends. I don't think that I would have as in-depth, meaningful conversations with that many men 20 years ago. No
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Partly, it's your own evolution too, right? That you're more comfortable being the real, authentic you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably part and parcel as well, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And you are a person that really prioritizes so much personal growth. Like I know that that is something that's really important to you. And to me, those people like you tend to be the healthiest, especially over the long term. You go through your ups and downs, of course, like anybody else, but over the long term, if you're really focusing on that and prioritizing that in your life, you see so many benefits. And one of them is these deep connections with people.
absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you think of the opposite, like um when I think about that comment that one of my friends made around like that choice, like I feel like I either take a huge risk here or I repress it. And I think so many I think that so many people where they do choose to repress it because it doesn't feel like whatever the equation is in their mind's eye that negotiates them out of sharing more. Um, my experience is just another belief that I have is it catches up to you.
Yeah.
Like you can only keep it in and repress and not take care of certain parts of yourself for so long before it will manifest in different ways, like disease, mental health. It's going to have an impact. There's a consequence, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you work with a lot of couples.
Mhm.
What would you say are some of the patterns that you're seeing, particularly in men in relationships that, could potentially be causing some damage that need to be worked on?
Mm. It's also when I first moved out here, um, and I started working with couples, I started to I reached out and started doing a lot of work with Terry Real.
Mhm.
Uh, so he's a couples therapist. Are you familiar with Terry?
I am, and I am conscious of, I believe he just went through a cancel situation in the last year. I don't know if
Did
you
he?
know
Okay.
that.
No,
Mhm.
I haven't. No, what was it? I'm super curious.
He was engaging in certain behaviors in his trainings that were identified by some of his, he has people who kind of work with his methodologies and help out at his
Mhm.
training seminars. And they had been kind of raising concern about certain things he was doing. And
Mm.
he was kind of, just kind of not listening, we'll say, and continuing to engage in the behaviors. And it led to kind of an uproar in the community.
I could totally see that.
Yeah.
Easily see that. Yeah. He so I what I liked about working with him and doing some training with him was that he was really really talking about how do we take on these parts of men coming out of the patriarch who like he wrote a book called I Don't Want to Talk About It for men
Mhm.
specifically.
Yeah.
And uh and it's something that I experienced when I first moved here was I sort of coined and talked about how I used to call it the Alberta boy. And the Alberta boy was this um needless, wantless man who was a good provider, good at getting things done. But when it came to relationships and marriage and talking about emotions or what they want, would show up in my office and I would ask them, what would you like? And they would just look at their partner and say, for them to be happy. I don't really have anything. And um, so that's what. So I reached out to Terry because Terry was doing a lot of great work with men back then. I can absolutely see he's got a big ego, and so
Tends to get people into trouble. We were talking about that right
yeah.
before we hopped on
Oh,
the recording.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think so that's a dynamic I see a lot where here's the thing. I don't actually believe that men don't know what they want. I don't think they have a voice to articulate it. And
Hmm.
so or space, that they haven't actually experienced, given themselves enough experience with space to actually say, what do I want here? Like, how do I want this relationship to be? They don't, it's, if there's no space there, then they're sitting in, well, I don't really want it, I don't really need anything.
Yeah.
And
Kind of a shallow existence, right? Like just
yeah,
very surface level, but haven't given themselves the opportunity to go deeper into their own desires.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I have a strong belief that, like, if we give you enough space and you give yourself time to buy into this process, that you do matter in this, and you do have wants, you just haven't explored that part, they're going to emerge.
Yeah.
So couples therapy is a lot of fun because you have two different individuals and it's a relationship they created together. um I don't know that we've ever lived in a time, and I'm going to include maybe the last 20 years here, where we've had more expectation on one another in relationship. Like,
Yeah.
we just have a
Yeah.
tremendous amount
I
of
feel like we expect, everybody to do everything. Like, we should all be, making these healthy meals and, exercising every day. And our kids are in all these activities and we should be making, over $100,000 a year, both of us. And we should be going on, 2 vacations and, saving for retirement. And it's like, it's a lot.
a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of pressure on
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah. So what do you think? So men need space. So they'd obviously need to take that and, and use it for their own, embodiment and knowing, like, and self-realization, of what they want. So they could be given a lot of space, but they'd have to actually take that and use it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what else do you think would be helpful for men during this time of, the world that we live in now? What do you think would be helpful?
Well, I think uh vulnerability, like being able to, like, talk about real issues, like this is what's really going on, and not shying away from that. I think that there is another is so something that I would sort of define as toxic masculinity is denial, like a denial of, like, I like, no, I'm not going there. And if you have resistance about going somewhere or talking about something, then there's something there. That's where I get curious, right? There's some resistance there. So I think if we could create more vulnerability, more space to actually talk about, like, this is what's going on for me, and more inner knowing, then we're going to be able to take care of our belief systems that we have. We're going to be able to take care of, like, our past trauma or whatever we might be bringing into our relationship. Because every relationship is going to have their thing. They're going to have their dance, their pattern of how they show up with one another. And every relationship is like, you have this connection, but every connection is going to go through phases where you move into disconnection.
Mhm.
And this is where we're not as skilled, right? Is how do we move from being not in connection with one another back? And for a lot of people, they just don't talk about it, or they have a fight and the next day it's like, okay, it's all better now. And that's totally fine, and it is. But it's when it catches up, it's when we say things or do things that are really impactful, and it gets really imprinted of, like, okay, that just happened. You think that about me, or you said that about me. And that's when we start to collect uh, these painful perceptions of one another. And repairing is a really, really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And so to be able to do that, you have to face it. You have to be able to stay in it and talk about it. And some people don't want to do that, which makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine you see some couples either way, like women bringing their husbands or men bringing their wives, or same sex partners as well, where, usually there's one individual that's more motivated to be in couples counseling than the other.
Often. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, often. So it's yeah, it becomes one of those pieces. I never like to be a salesperson. I'm sure you're the same, where like, I don't have to sell you on this. I never want to be more motivated for someone else's personal growth than they are for themselves. I think that's a bad combination. But I think absolutely, like one person is usually initiating it. And I think just acknowledging that, that the other person might take some time, but that they're usually, that's what their motivation is, that their partner is in the spot that they really want to see change happen.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that can be enough of an invitation to get serious about it.
Right.
And that's part of our job too, is to help them to see the value
Mm-hmm.
in, like, okay, if we take these things on, we're gonna have a happy, more nourishing, more connection filled relationship, and everyone wants that.
Yeah. Who would say no to that?
Yeah.
I know you used to run men's groups, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? In my opinion, men's groups are such a wonderful way for men to learn how to be authentic and connect more deeply and, have some of these types of relationship deepening experiences that are often just not done in our culture. Would you say that was a great way for that to happen?
Yeah. Well, I think, who doesn't want to be more authentic and real? And I think everyone does. Uh, I think this is like a universal thing for most people, is that they want to be more real, they want to be more authentic. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
And if you can create a space with a group of men, and if you can create a container where it's like, all right, we all collectively agree that this space is ours, and we're going to be real with one another, and you start to go through those layers, and you start to see that, like, we all have the same struggles, we all have the same fears, we
Yeah.
all have the same pain, we all have the same fear of judgment. And then you start to, it really melts all of that perceived judgment, and it's a beautiful thing. I think it's very, very powerful for people to experience. um and I don't, like, I think good group work like that can really, really transform an individual.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've really been feeling the draw toward more group offerings myself,
Yeah.
because I just see how being authentic and vulnerable in a group setting and being witnessed in that in such a healthy way, that is so transformative, even beyond, our traditional one-on-one work model.
Well, you've been through like a few mastermind groups. I know we tried to start one and it just became a one-on-one, but um, like, did you have a similar experience of like just going deeper and deeper and being on a journey together?
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken to you a lot about my work with Mikosi, my shaman, and that was a group experience. And I was joining just for Mikosi. Like when I joined, it was like, I want to learn from her. She just has such high level ideas about spirituality and business and personal growth that I was really interested in. And so that was why I joined. It was nothing to do with the group. I was like, "Oh, okay, there'll be some other people there, whatever." That was my feeling about it. And then over time it was like, wow, I'm just loving the connection with these other people, and they were just so similar to me, and we just connected on the same levels, and they started to become just such close friends of mine, and I felt more able to be myself. It helped me to realize how much I'd been hiding aspects of myself in other places. And in
Mm-hmm.
this place, I could just practice being myself. And you know, just subconsciously, I started to see it's totally fine. Like I can just be the real me. And not only is it fine, it's way better than what I've been doing, masking certain aspects of myself. So it's been absolutely transformative for me. Yeah.
I know. It's such an amazing journey, right?
Yeah, it really is. Well, Ken, I could talk to you all day long, but in the interest of time, I feel like we better wrap up. But I would love for you to share with the listeners how
Hmm.
they can get a hold of you, what your business name is, and all of that fun stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Um, so you can contact us at onelifecounselingandcoaching.com. and our phone number is 1-888-540-5791. And we'd be happy to help you if you're in any sort of need for relationship help, coaching, or any individual counseling.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today, Ken.
Thanks for having me, Jenny.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, take care.